Mara Jensen never believed her life would one day circle back to the man who broke her in the most humiliating way possible. Yet there she was, standing beneath the blinding lights of Manhattan's Avery Tower, clutching the hands of her 3 toddlers, her breath shaking as the elevator climbed toward the floor where her past and her fate waited to strike. She hadn't stepped into a luxury building in years. The polished marble floors, the smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air, the quiet hum of wealth behind every glass wall, everything reminded her of the world she once belonged to, the world that spat her out the moment she became inconvenient. But she wasn't alone this time. Ryland Brooks walked beside her, steady as stone, the man who had carried her through all the nights her heart couldn't bear the weight anymore. He wasn't dressed like the billionaires upstairs. No designer suit, no gold cufflinks, just a clean shirt, rolled sleeves, and the softness of someone who'd earned every inch of his strength. Still, Mara's hands trembled, because on the other side of those elevator doors was Colton Avery, her ex-husband, the tech mogul who once vowed to love her, then abandoned her the moment he learned she was pregnant with triplets. Today, he thought she came here to beg. Today, he thought he still owned the story. Today, he thought he still owned her. But today, for the first time, Mara carried a truth powerful enough to shatter him. As the elevator dinged and the doors slid open, Colton's furious voice thundered across the hall, and what he saw made him freeze in a way no one had ever seen before. Mara Jensen wasn't born for a life of marble floors and penthouse windows. She came from a quiet suburb in Minnesota, raised by a mother who worked double shifts as a school cafeteria cook, and always reminded her that kindness was a currency no one could steal. Mara grew up soft-spoken, book-loving, the kind of girl who found comfort in organizing shelves at the local library after school. She never imagined her path would one day cross with a billionaire, much less that he would destroy every corner of the gentle world she came from. Before everything shattered, Mara worked as a library assistant, earning just enough to share a simple apartment with her mother. When her mother fell ill, Mara took on extra hours, shelving books until midnight, pushing through exhaustion with warm tea and quiet prayers that life would get easier. But life rarely grants such mercy. Her mother passed away when Mara was only 24, leaving her with grief that never fully healed. By the time she met Colton Avery during a reading event in Minneapolis, Mara was fragile but hopeful. He walked in with the aura of a man used to rooms bending toward him. Tailored suit, crisp smile, confidence that filled the air like expensive cologne. When he approached her table, asking about a book she was reading, Mara felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. He listened, or at least pretended to, nodding with perfect charm. It was easy to fall for a man like that. Too easy. Colton swept her into a world she'd only glimpsed in movies. Private dinners overlooking Chicago's skyline, weekends on business jets where she felt too stunned to even speak. He insisted she quit her job. No wife of mine should be working herself sick for pennies, he'd said, brushing a Mont Blanc pen across a contract he wanted her to sign. A prenup. At the time, it felt like love. Looking back, it was the first chain he clasped around her. Then came the pregnancy. 3 heartbeats. 3 miracles. Mara cried with joy. Colton froze like someone had slapped him. She didn't understand then, but she would soon. He didn't want children, not yet, not unless they benefited his carefully curated image. When reporters started whispering about his messy personal life, Colton snapped. His affection turned cold, his words grew sharp. And eventually, he left, vanishing into the world of flashing cameras while Mara faced the impossible alone. She delivered triplets prematurely, holding no one's hand. No family left, no husband, no money, just fear and love and 3 tiny babies who depended on her. She worked nights at an Amazon warehouse, hauling packages until her back throbbed, surviving on 3 hours of sleep and hope so small it barely flickered. People whispered she was weak, but they didn't know the fire she carried, a fire that would soon become the very force that brought a billionaire to his knees. The first time Mara stepped into Colton Avery's world, she felt like she was trespassing in a museum where everything was too polished, too expensive, too untouched by real life. Colton lived in a penthouse on the 62nd floor overlooking downtown Chicago, The kind of place that made people stop talking the moment they walked in. The glass walls looked out to a skyline glittering like diamonds. The leather couches smelled new, and the kitchen had appliances she didn't even know how to turn on. Colton watched her quietly as she stood frozen near the doorway that first night. "Get used to it," he said, almost gently. She tried. God, she tried. He bought her clothes she never asked for, set her up with an iPhone she barely knew how to use and insisted she sit beside him at every high-end dinner with investors. Dinners where conversations circled around stock movements, tech acquisitions, and offshore expansions. Mara would smile politely, sip sparkling water, and pretend she understood any of it. The truth was, she felt like a visitor who had wandered into a world built on codes she didn't have the manual for. Still, there were moments she thought happiness might grow here. Like the night he took her to a gala at the Plaza in Manhattan. She wore a borrowed silver dress. He upgraded at the last minute to something far more expensive. Colton looked proud that night, but Mara would later realize he wasn't proud of her, only of how she looked standing next to him. The cracks began showing long before the pregnancy. Subtle things. Colton correcting the way she spoke at dinner. Colton brushing off her worries about her mother's old belongings she kept in boxes. Colton insisting that their future children would be raised by nannies, trained properly. Colton scolding her for using coupons at a grocery store because Avery wives don't act like that. These weren't knives, not yet, just paper cuts. But paper cuts accumulate. When Mara found out she was pregnant, she rehearsed in her head how she would tell him. She pictured his smile, his lifted eyebrows, the warm hug. Instead, when she whispered, "It's triplets," Colton's face drained of all color. "3?" he muttered, as though it were a financial threat. She reached for his hand. He pulled away. That was the night she realized love alone couldn't soften a man made of stone. The more her belly grew, the more the penthouse felt like a cage. When reporters began speculating about Colton's unexpected family expansion, he started sleeping in a separate room. His assistant suggested containing the situation. Colton never corrected him. By the time Mara entered her third trimester, she could feel it. She didn't belong in his world. She never truly had, and soon she would be pushed out completely. The night everything shattered didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence, cold, heavy, unfamiliar. Mara was 7 months pregnant, carrying the weight of 3 tiny lives, when she noticed Colton's laptop open on the marble kitchen island. He never left his devices unattended. Ever. She only meant to close it. But one subject line froze her in place. Managing the PR problem, M. Her trembling finger clicked before her heart could stop her. Emails filled the screen. His publicist, his attorney, his board advisors, discussing her, the pregnancy, the unplanned expansion, and how it threatened a deal Colton had been negotiating for months. Someone suggested releasing a narrative that Mara had emotional instability. Another mentioned controlling the story before she gives birth. And Colton had replied with a single ice-cold line. "Handle it." The room spun. Mara felt the baby shift in her stomach, as if reacting to her fear. She swallowed the rising nausea and waited for him to come home, clutching the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. Rain hammered the windows that night, thunder growling across the skyline. When Colton finally walked in, drenched, irritated, wiping rain off his Rolex, Mara stepped forward with the laptop in her hands. "What is this?" she whispered. He glanced at the screen, then at her, and something dark flickered in his eyes. "You weren't supposed to see that." "That's your response?" "It's business, Mara. You wouldn't understand." She felt the crack inside her widen. "You called our children a PR problem. I called the situation a problem, and frankly, you made it worse." The argument escalated quickly, his voice sharp, hers trembling. "I'm carrying your children, Colton." "Children I didn't ask for," he snapped. The words sliced through her like a blade. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the coldness on his face. "You planned this," he hissed. "3 kids? Convenient for you." Her breath caught. "I didn't even know I was having triplets until the doctor told me." Colton didn't care. Control, his obsession, was slipping, and he needed someone to blame. When she begged him to attend the next prenatal appointment, he said, "I have a merger meeting. Priorities, Mara." Then came the final blow. He reached into a drawer, tossed a stack of papers on the island, a separation agreement, already prepared. Already signed by him. "You'll leave tomorrow," he said. "I'm not leaving my home." "This isn't your home. It never was." Her heart cracked open. Rain pounded harder, lightning slicing the sky like punishment. Colton grabbed an umbrella and stormed out into the raging storm without looking back, leaving Mara alone in the cavernous penthouse, 3 lives kicking inside her, and one brutal truth echoing in the thunder. She had just been abandoned by the man she once believed would protect her. The contractions started before sunrise, sharp and sudden, ripping Mara out of a shallow sleep on the cold penthouse couch. She had refused to leave that night, clutching her stomach, whispering to the babies that she would find a way. But at 4:12 a.m., the first jolt knocked the breath from her lungs. Her water broke minutes later, soaking the blanket she'd pulled over herself. Panic pierced through her chest. Triplets. 7 months. Too early. Too dangerous. Her first thought, against all reason, was Colton. She grabbed her phone and dialed him with shaking fingers. The call rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again. Nothing. He had turned his phone off. A security guard, startled by her cries in the lobby, called an ambulance. By the time the EMTs lifted her onto the stretcher, Mara was sobbing, half from pain, half from terror. "Is your husband meeting us at the hospital?" one of them asked gently. She couldn't answer. She only turned her face toward the window as the ambulance sped through Chicago's rainy streets, sirens piercing the morning gloom. At the hospital, fluorescent lights blurred into streaks of white as nurses rushed her into the maternity ward. "Premature labor, possible fetal distress," someone shouted. A nurse squeezed Mara's shoulder. "Do you have family you want us to call?" "My mother." The realization hit her. She's gone. And the father? Mara's lips trembled. "He isn't coming." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Her delivery room felt too big, too bright, too empty. When the contractions intensified, she reached for a hand, any hand, but there was none. No partner, no parent, no friend. Just nurses moving in, practiced efficiency, faces blurring as tears filled her eyes. Baby A arrived first, a tiny fragile boy with a cry so soft it barely registered. Baby B followed minutes later, a girl struggling for breath, turning the room tense. Baby C came last, a boy who didn't cry at first, making Mara's heart stop until the nurse coaxed a thin whimper out of him. Each baby was whisked away to the NICU. She barely had time to touch their hands. Hours later, after surgery, exhaustion, and fear swallowing her whole, a hospital volunteer left a small bouquet on the bedside table. A white card was tucked inside. "Congratulations on the arrivals. CA." No signature, no visit, no warmth. Just 2 initials that felt like a punch to the chest. Mara pressed her palms to her face and cried, silent, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Not because she was weak, but because she had survived something no one should face alone. When she finally opened her eyes, the glass window reflected a woman she barely recognized. Tired, grieving, but alive. And somewhere inside her, a spark flickered. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this darkest hour, was the beginning of a strength that would one day bring Colton Avery's entire empire crashing down. Mara left the hospital 10 days later with 3 infants barely the size of her forearm. The NICU nurses hugged her tightly, but even their kindness couldn't soften the reality waiting outside. She had nowhere to go except a cramped, damp 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, an emergency lease a social worker found after she confessed she couldn't return to the penthouse. The taxi driver helped her unload the donated car seats and 3 hospital bags. When the door shut behind her, the silence felt suffocating. The apartment smelled faintly of old carpet and winter air trapped too long behind swollen windows. She placed the babies, Noah, Lily, and Finn, into 3 mismatched second-hand cribs she'd found on Facebook Marketplace. For a moment, she stood there staring at them, her mind numb. 3 tiny chests rising and falling. 3 miracles needing her every second. And she was completely, utterly alone. That first week was a blur of exhaustion. Feedings every 2 hours, diapers that seemed endless. Finn's oxygen monitor beeping at 3 a.m. Lily struggling to latch no matter how Mara tried. Noah crying with colic until dawn. Her own body still recovering from the emergency C-section, every movement sending pain slicing down her abdomen. Bills piled on the counter, hospital fees, formula costs, rent due in 10 days. She tried calling Colton's assistant to ask about temporary support. The woman responded with a rehearsed, icy line. Mr. Avery has no comment at this time. No comment. About his own children. On the fourth night, when all three babies were screaming and her phone buzzed with a past due notice from the power company, Mara sank to the floor. She pressed her forehead to the peeling linoleum and sobbed. She cried so hard she couldn't breathe. She cried until she tasted salt and regret and fear all blended together. But even then, she didn't break. Not fully, because Finn's monitor beeped again and she forced herself up. After 3 months, her savings ran dry. She took a graveyard shift job at an Amazon warehouse, stacking boxes from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. A neighbor teenager watched the babies for a small fee. Mara stretched every dollar, choosing diapers over meals, skipping winter coats so the babies could have formula. She slept sitting up, often with a baby on her chest, her clothes stained with spit up and tears she never let herself shed until after midnight. She learned to live in 30-minute fragments between cries, alarms, and panic. Sometimes on the subway to work, she'd see posters of Colton, magazine covers praising him as a visionary, a philanthropist, a man of integrity. She would stare at his smile, tight and polished, and whisper under her breath, "You left us. You left them." But life has a way of shifting when you least expect it. One freezing December night, after her shift ended, Mara trudged up the stairs to her apartment and found a stranger standing outside her door. A man with tired eyes and calloused hands. A man who would change everything. The hallway lights flickered as Mara climbed the last flight of stairs, her legs trembling from exhaustion. It was nearly 5 a.m. after a brutal warehouse shift, and all she wanted was to collapse beside the triplets and breathe for a moment. But when she turned the corner, she jolted to a stop. A man stood outside her apartment door, holding a small toolbox and a grocery bag. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his flannel shirt dusted with sawdust as if he had come straight from a workshop. His hair was messy, his eyes tired but gentle. He shifted when he noticed her. "You must be Mara," he said, voice low and warm. "I'm Rylan, your neighbor across the hall." Her heart thudded. She instinctively checked the apartment door, wondering if someone had broken in. "Is something wrong?" she asked, clutching her bag tighter. Rylan lifted the toolbox. "Heard your power flickering for days. I thought you might need help. And I heard the babies crying last night. Sounded like a rough one." Heat rushed to Mara's cheeks. Embarrassment, shame, exhaustion all blending together. "I didn't mean for the noise to bother anyone." He shook his head instantly. "No, I just figured you could use an extra pair of hands." He reached into the grocery bag and held out a pack of diapers and a container of formula. "I bought too much," he added awkwardly, but Mara could tell it wasn't true. He had bought it for her. For a moment she couldn't speak. Kindness had become such a rare thing in her life that she didn't know how to accept it. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I know," he replied softly, "but I'm here anyway." Inside the apartment, the babies started crying. Mara fumbled with her keys, hands shaking from fatigue. Rylan hesitated. "Do you want help carrying things in?" Something inside her, tired, bruised, desperate, finally cracked. "Yes," she breathed. "Please." He followed her inside, eyes widening at the cramped space, the mismatched cribs, the laundry piled in baskets, the faint medical beeps from Finn's monitor. But Rylan didn't show pity. He simply knelt beside the nearest crib and whispered, "Hey, little guy. Rough night?" To Mara's shock, Finn calmed. Lily stopped crying too, turning her gaze toward Rylan as if drawn to the sound of his voice. Noah blinked sleepily up at him. "You're good with kids," Mara murmured, surprised. He nodded once. "Used to volunteer at a community shelter. And..." He paused, something flickering across his face. "I've lost people before. I know what it's like to need help." There it was. Something unspoken, a shadow in his eyes. As dawn crept through the broken blinds, Rylan fixed her fuse box, tightened her loose window latch, and cleaned a leak under her sink, all while Mara fed the babies. He worked quietly, like someone used to stepping into chaos and bringing order back one gentle piece at a time. Before leaving, he rested a hand on the doorway. "If you ever need anything, night or day, just knock." And for the first time since the triplets were born, Mara felt a fragile, trembling sense of hope rise in her chest. She had no idea that this man, This quiet stranger in a dusty flannel would one day stand between her and the billionaire who destroyed her life. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet hours between feedings, in the tiny space of Mara's worn-down apartment where exhaustion lived in every corner, but something warmer slowly grew beside it. After that first night, Ryland began stopping by just to check the wiring or drop off extra groceries he didn't need. But Mara knew he was really checking on them, her and the babies. One evening, Noah had been crying for almost an hour, his tiny face red and scrunched. Mara bounced him against her shoulder, whispering lullabies she barely remembered. Her back ached, her eyes burned. When a soft knock sounded at the door, she didn't even have the strength to answer. The door creaked open anyway. "Mara?" Ryland stepped inside, holding a small bag of tools. "I heard, oh." His voice softened as he saw her tears. "Here," he said gently, holding out his arms. She hesitated only a second before placing Noah in them. To her astonishment, Noah settled almost instantly, tucking his cheek against Ryland's chest. "You've got magic hands," she murmured. He smiled, a little shy. "Just practice." From that night on, he came by nearly every day. Sometimes after work, sometimes in the middle of the night when he heard the babies crying through the thin apartment walls. He built a wooden triple-high chair out of leftover planks from his workshop, sanded smooth until it gleamed. He fixed the broken heater the landlord kept postponing. He repaired a stroller wheel. He taught Mara how to swaddle Lily so she wouldn't wiggle free and kick off her socks. The triplets began recognizing him faster than anyone else. Noah would crawl to the door when he heard Ryland's footsteps. Lily's first giggle wasn't for Mara, it was for him when he made a silly face. Finn, the frailest of the three, relaxed most easily in Ryland's arms. One afternoon, as Ryland gently fed Finn from a bottle, Mara watched him from across the room. His brow furrowed in concentration, his touch cautious but confident. He wasn't pretending to help. He wasn't performing. He was simply there, present, steady, dependable. Everything she had begged Colton to be. "Why are you doing all this?" Mara finally asked. Ryland paused, the bottle still in hand. He didn't look at her right away. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said quietly. "And because these kids deserve someone who shows up." The words sank deep. No man had ever said something so simple and meant it so completely. But there was something else she noticed, something that made her heart twist. Whenever she mentioned Colton, even in passing, a shadow crossed Ryland's face. She didn't understand it then. Not yet. Still, in the months that followed, Ryland became the constant gravity in their shifting world. Mara found herself smiling more, sleeping a little easier, standing straighter. The babies stopped being a burden she shouldered alone. They became a family, fragile but real. And though she didn't know it, the bond forming between them was already lighting a fuse that would one day explode right in Colton Avery's perfectly manicured world. Colton Avery had not thought about Mara or the triplets for almost a year, at least not in any way that carried responsibility. But when the glossy cover of a tech magazine labeled him America's coldest CEO, after rumors leaked about him abandoning his pregnant wife, everything changed. The board hated scandals. Investors panicked easily. Suddenly Colton's image, the thing he worshipped above all else, was slipping through his fingers. During a meeting inside Avery Tower, one of his PR strategists slid a tablet across the table. "Sir, public sentiment is shifting. You look heartless. That's not good for the IPO." Colton scoffed. "People forget." "Not this time," the strategist replied. "There's a thread online with photos of your kids. Thousands of comments. It's not flattering." Colton's jaw tightened. "My kids?" he repeated, as if the word offended him. "Yes, the triplets. People love underdog stories. They love a struggling mother. It makes you look heartless," another advisor finished. Colton's nostrils flared. He leaned back, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the table in irritation. "So what's your brilliant plan?" "Reconnect," the strategist said. "Show you're a family man. Maybe a few staged photos. A charity appearance. Something warm." Colton's expression shifted, calculating, not emotional. "You want me to go play daddy," he muttered. "It could save millions." That night, for the first time since abandoning her, Colton called Mara. She nearly dropped her phone. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask about the baby's health. Instead, he said, "We need to meet. I have a proposal that benefits us both." Her stomach twisted. She knew him well enough to hear the manipulation in his tone. "Colton, I'm busy. The kids. Make time," he snapped. "You owe me that much." "Owe him?" She hung up before she said something she'd regret. But the calls kept coming. Emails, messages from his lawyers, a request to meet at a midtown law office. After weeks of pressure, Mara agreed, not because she wanted to, but because single mothers don't have the luxury of ignoring billionaires who control the legal system. Rylan insisted on going with her. "Just stay outside," she said nervously. "I'm not letting you face him alone," he replied. When she stepped into the conference room, Colton was already there, polished and smug, tapping his pen. He didn't hug her. He didn't ask about the children. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. "I need custody photos," he said, "and a few public appearances. In return, I'll increase support." Mara stared at him, stunned. "You want to use our children as props? It's mutually beneficial," he said. "Don't be dramatic." She closed the folder. "No." Colton's smile thinned. "You think you can afford to say no?" For the first time in months, Mara didn't shrink. Behind her, through the glass wall, she saw Rylan waiting, arms crossed, eyes firm, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. Colton didn't know it yet, but this refusal, this first small spark of defiance, was the beginning of a fire he would not be able to extinguish. The second meeting happened 2 weeks later, in a sleek midtown law office with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look colder than ever. Mara sat at one end of a long mahogany table, exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. She had slept maybe 3 hours the night before. The triplets had all caught the same fever. But she was here, because Colton wouldn't stop until she heard him out. He entered with the same swagger he used during board presentations. Perfect suit, perfect tie, perfect lie of a smile. "Mara," he said, as if her name were an inconvenience. "Let's make this simple." A lawyer placed a thick stack of papers in front of her, a contract full of clauses and conditions. Mara skimmed the first page and her stomach twisted into a hard knot. Colton leaned back. "This agreement protects everyone." "Everyone," Mara whispered. "Or just you?" Clause after clause was poison disguised as professionalism. She would receive a modest monthly support payment, but only if she agreed to allow Colton scheduled photo ops with the triplets, refrain from speaking publicly about their marriage, sign a confidentiality addendum about his past behavior, never introduce any unapproved male influence into the children's lives. Her pulse spiked. "Unapproved male influence?" she repeated. "What does that even mean?" Colton's jaw twitched. "It means I don't want random men near my kids." "They're not your props," she snapped. "They're my heirs," he shot back. "You think I'll let some handyman raise them?" Mara froze. Handyman. The word sliced like a blade. He meant Rylan. "You don't even know your own children's middle names," she said, voice trembling but steady. "You've never changed a diaper. You didn't show up when Finn stopped breathing. And now you want to decide who can be around them?" Colton's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the coldness she remembered from their last fight in the penthouse. "You forget," he said quietly. "I have the power here." She pushed the contract back across the table. "You don't get to buy your way into their lives because your reputation is slipping." He laughed, a low, mocking sound. "Oh, Mara, you're tired. You're overwhelmed. You're not thinking clearly. Sign the agreement and everything gets easier. For you, for them, for everyone." She inhaled sharply. "The only reason things are hard is because you left us." The room fell silent. Colton nodded to his lawyer. "Explain her legal risks." The attorney began listing possibilities: reduced support, court battles, his ability to outspend her in every scenario. It was a familiar tactic: intimidation, polished and legal. Mara's throat tightened, but she didn't back down. Because behind the glass wall, in the hallway, she could see Rylan waiting. Steady, patient, his gaze fixed on her like an anchor. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone reminded her she had survived worse than threats. She had survived abandonment, labor, poverty, and nights she thought would break her. Colton tapped the contract again. "Last chance." Mara rose from her chair. "No," she said. "That was your last chance." She walked toward the door, heart pounding, palms sweating, but free in a way she hadn't felt since the day he left her in that storm. Colton stared after her, not realizing the truth yet. This was the moment he lost the war, long before he ever realized one had begun. Mara had never stepped foot inside a legal aid clinic before. The place smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee, nothing like the sterile luxury of the law firms Colton used. She sat in a worn plastic chair, clutching a folder full of wrinkled documents, bills, medical records, old emails, everything she'd kept in a shoebox under her bed. Her hands trembled as she waited, wondering if she was foolish for even trying. A young attorney named Harper Lane finally called her name. Harper couldn't have been more than 30, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. She offered a warm smile, the kind that made Mara's throat tighten. "Let's see what we're working with," Harper said gently. Mara laid out every paper she had. As Harper skimmed through them, her smile faded, replaced by something far stronger. "Did Colton's team pressure you into signing anything?" "They tried," Mara whispered. "Did they provide consistent child support?" "No." "Did he visit the children at all?" "Never." Harper exhaled slowly, closing the folder. "Mara, you've been bullied. Intentionally." Mara blinked back tears. "I thought maybe I was just overwhelmed." "No," Harper said. "You were targeted. That's different." For the first time, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years: validation. Harper began outlining her legal options: filing for formal support, documenting abandonment, petitioning for full custody, challenging Colton's threats. As each sentence felt like someone handing her bricks to rebuild the parts of herself she'd lost. "You'll need everything organized," Harper said. "Emails, receipts, medical visits, texts, anything that proves you raised the children alone." Mara nodded, determination curling in her chest. That night, she spread hundreds of papers across her small kitchen table. Rylan came over and silently pulled up a chair. "You don't have to stay," she murmured. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. They spent hours sorting files. Rylan typed dates into a spreadsheet on Mara's old refurbished laptop, while she annotated timelines with color-coded sticky notes. Every fact they logged, every missed visit, every unpaid bill, felt like reclaiming a piece of truth Colton had stolen. Around midnight, Mara paused, staring at an old message from Colton. "You planned this," he had written. Her chest tightened. Rylan gently touched her wrist. "That was a lie," he said. He was scared of losing control. She looked up at him. "Why do you know so much about how he works?" A shadow crossed his expression. "Because he did something similar to me, years ago." Her breath caught. "What happened?" But Rylan only shook his head. "One day I'll tell you, when you're ready to hear it." The mystery lingered, but for now she didn't push. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, the timeline was complete. A mountain of evidence, painful, undeniable, sat neatly organized in folders. Harper emailed with one final instruction: be prepared. When powerful men feel cornered, they get reckless. Mara read the message twice. She wasn't the same terrified woman she'd been months ago. Not anymore. Because now she wasn't fighting alone. And soon, Colton Avery would learn that the woman he abandoned had become someone capable of burning his lies to the ground. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a fragile rhythm. Mara worked, cared for the triplets, organized documents for Harper, and tried to steady her nerves every time Colton's name appeared in her inbox. But something else was happening too. Something quieter, steadier. Rylan was rising in her life like dawn, gently, consistently, without demanding anything in return. One chilly morning, he knocked on her door before sunrise. "You should come see something," he said. Mara, bleary-eyed and holding Finn, frowned. "Rylan, it's 6 a.m. "I know," he chuckled, "but trust me." She dressed the babies, bundled them in blankets, and followed him outside. Parked in the street was a gently used Mercedes Sprinter van, clean, reliable, large enough for 3 car seats. "I bought it for work," he said quickly, scratching the back of his neck. "But it'll help us take the kids to doctor appointments." Us. The word made her chest warm. He had installed 3 car seats himself, each one cushioned and safe. When Mara stared at him, speechless, he shrugged. "I do things differently than him," he said. He didn't have to say who him was. That was the first hint she received, that Rylan's connection to Colton ran deeper than she realized. Still, he remained quiet about it. A week later, when Noah caught a high fever and the clinic was overbooked, Rylan rearranged his entire workday to drive them across Brooklyn. He stayed through the appointment, rocked Noah through each whimper, and carried him down the icy steps as if he were made of glass. The doctor smiled at him. "You the father?" Rylan hesitated. Before he could answer, Mara whispered, He's the one who shows up." And the doctor nodded, satisfied. That night, after the kids finally fell asleep, Mara found Ryland sitting at her tiny kitchen table, reading a message on his phone with a clenched jaw. "Everything okay?" she asked. He locked the screen instantly. "Too quickly," he said. "Just work stuff." But the shadow in his eyes told another story. Later, as he helped her wash bottles, she noticed a faded scar along his forearm, thin but deep. "What happened there?" Ryland rinsed a bottle, avoiding her gaze. "Avery Innovations happened." Her breath froze. He dried his hands slowly. "Colton didn't just fire me. He sabotaged my team. He stole the patent we built. He ruined my reputation so I couldn't work in our field again. I lost almost everything in one day." Mara's pulse quickened. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you deserved help without guilt, and because your struggle wasn't about me." Mara sank into a chair, absorbing the truth. Colton hadn't just thrown her away. He had a history of destroying anyone who threatened his ego. And now, slowly, all those broken pieces, hers, Ryland's, were aligning into a truth powerful enough to tear Colton's image apart. Ryland met her eyes. "I'm not going to let him hurt you again," he said softly. "Or those kids." For the first time in her life, Mara believed someone when they promised to stay. Neither of them knew it yet, but Ryland's past would soon become the very weapon that turned the entire war in Mara's favor. Snow fell softly over Manhattan the night the invitation arrived. A thick ivory envelope slipped under Mara's apartment door. She almost didn't open it. Bills and threats from Colton's lawyers were the only mail she expected. But when she tore the seal, her breath caught. Avery Innovations Charity Gala. The Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. Formal attire required. Her name was printed on the RSVP, not Colton's, hers. At the bottom was a short line scrawled in his unmistakable handwriting: "Attendance is expected." Expected. Like she was part of his machinery again. Mara sank onto the couch, clutching the letter. She felt cornered. If she didn't go, Colton would spin the narrative as her being uncooperative. If she did go, she walked right into his world, his territory, where she had no power. When Ryland came by that evening, she handed him the letter. He read it once, jaw tightening. "He wants to parade you," Ryland said, "make himself look good before the board." "I know. You're not going alone." She stared at him, startled. "Ryland, I can't drag you into this circus." He shook his head. "You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm walking there on my own 2 feet. Later that week, Harper confirmed it. The board is watching him closely. If he looks unstable or loses public favor, they might push for leadership restructuring. He wants you there, smiling beside him." But Harper also smiled. "You can use that." And so Mara prepared. She didn't own a gown. She didn't have money for hair appointments or makeup artists. But her neighbor Rosa insisted she borrow a navy evening dress she had worn once, years ago, to her daughter's graduation dinner. Mara slipped into it, surprised to find it fit perfectly. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, older, stronger, worn but unbroken. Ryland arrived in a simple charcoal suit, nothing fancy, but on him, it looked dignified. He held a tiny velvet pouch. "For the kids," he said. Inside were 3 small silver charms, one for each triplet, carved with their initials. Mara blinked back tears. "Ryland, they'll cherish these." "I hope so." The plaza glowed under crystal chandeliers as they stepped inside. Wealth clung to the air like perfume. Laughter, champagne, silk gowns, cameras. It was everything Mara had once been terrified of. But she wasn't shaking now. Not with Ryland beside her. Not with 3 children to defend. Not with truth gathering strength behind her like a storm. Across the room, Colton stood with executives, laughing too loudly, pretending not to notice her. But he did. The moment Mara entered, his expression cracked, the confident facade slipping for a fraction of a second. He wasn't expecting this version of her. He wasn't expecting Ryland at all. His eyes narrowed, jaw flexing. She felt the temperature shift. The gala was supposed to be his stage, but he had just realized she wasn't there to play the role he wrote for her. She was there to burn the script. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath gold chandeliers, but the air grew tight the moment Colton Avery locked eyes with Mara. His smile froze, stiff and brittle, like glass under pressure. Executives sensed the shift and subtly stepped aside, leaving a clear path between them. Mara felt her pulse drum against her ribs, but she didn't look away. She stood taller, Ryland's steady presence at her side like a silent shield. Colton approached with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent for him. "Mara," he said, voice dripping with false warmth, "you look presentable." The insult landed softly, but Mara didn't flinch. "Thank you," she replied coolly. "I came because you insisted." Colton's gaze flicked to Rylan. "And you brought a +1. Interesting." Rylan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His calm stare spoke louder than words. Colton sneered. "You really downgraded, Mara." A murmur rippled through nearby guests. Shock, discomfort, curiosity. Phones lifted subtly. Eyes watched. Colton didn't notice. He was too busy performing dominance. "You wanted a scene?" Mara whispered. "You're making one." "I'm saving you," he hissed. "Do you realize what this gala means? The board is here. Investors are here. And you stroll in with me," Rylan cut in, voice low. "She walked in with me." Colton turned sharply. "Stay out of this." "No," Rylan said calmly. "I'm staying right here." Something ugly twisted in Colton's expression. He stepped closer, lowering his voice in a vicious whisper. "You think she cares about you? She's clinging to you because she has nothing else." Rylan didn't react, but Mara did. "That's enough," she said sharply. But Colton wasn't finished. He grabbed Mara's wrist, not hurting her, but enough to make her breath catch. "You will smile for photos," he said. "You will stand beside me tonight, and you will act like the perfect mother, or I'll make the custody battle unbearable." That was the moment the room shifted. Rylan stepped forward instantly. "Let go of her," Colton scoffed. "Or what?" He tightened his grip. A gasp traveled through the crowd. Mara pulled her wrist away, the movement small but defiant. "You don't own me," she said softly, but the softness held steel. "That's where you're wrong," Colton snapped. "Everything about this looks bad for you. Single mother, no money, no stability. You abandoned your children," Mara cut in. "That looks worse." His face flushed with anger. "You want to talk about abandonment? You planned that pregnancy." A voice behind them interrupted. "Mr. Avery," a board member said carefully, "people are watching." Colton turned, finally noticing the phones raised around the ballroom, people recording, people whispering, people seeing him, unfiltered, uncontrolled. He reached for Mara again, desperate to salvage the moment, but Rylan stepped between them. "Touch her again," he said quietly, "and see what happens." Colton's facade cracked completely, rage replacing charm. "You think you're a threat?" "No," Rylan replied. "I'm her choice." The words hit harder than any punch. Colton froze. The room held its breath. For the first time in his life, he looked like a man realizing he was losing something he could never buy back. And across the ballroom, a journalist lowered her phone, smiling. She had captured everything. It happened so fast, yet so clearly, that Mara would remember every second of it for the rest of her life. One moment, Colton Avery was towering over her in fury, demanding obedience like he always had. The next, every phone in the ballroom lifted a little higher, every whisper sharpened, every journalist's eyes gleamed with the thrill of a story unfolding right in front of them. Colton noticed too late. A reporter from a finance network stepped forward, microphone already on. "Mr. Avery," she said loudly, "is everything all right? You seem tense." Executives nearby stiffened. Investors watched with predatory interest. Someone at the champagne bar muttered, "This is bad, really bad." Colton straightened, forcing a smile. "Just a private disagreement," he said. "Nothing worth reporting." But the reporter wasn't fooled. "I captured your earlier comments," she replied. "Would you like to clarify them on record?" Colton's eyes flashed with panic, subtle but visible to anyone paying attention. His jaw ticked. His fingers twitched. He was unraveling. Mara stood silently watching him. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She didn't shrink. She didn't apologize. She simply existed, steady, unshaken, while his world began to tilt. Then a second reporter joined in. "Is it true you haven't visited your children since their birth?" A third added, "Sources say you refused child support for over a year. Can you confirm?" A fourth, "Are you leveraging your children to soften your public image before the IPO?" Colton's face drained of color. "This is inappropriate," he snapped. "Turn those off." But no one did. Rylan moved closer to Mara, just enough that she felt warmth at her back. Not possessive, protective. A quiet reminder, you're not alone. Colton swallowed hard, trying to regain control. "My ex-wife is exaggerating. She's emotional. She struggles with." "Don't," Mara said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ballroom like a blade. He froze. She stepped forward, not toward him but past him into the small circle of reporters. "If I'm emotional," she said calmly, "it's because I raised 3 premature infants alone while their father changed phone numbers to avoid me. If I struggle, it's because I worked warehouse shifts at 2 a.m. while he told his PR team to call our children a problem." A collective gasp moved through the room. Colton opened his mouth, but she kept going. Her voice grew steadier with each word. "And tonight, he grabbed my wrist in public because I refused to let him use our children as props." The journalist holding the mic blinked. "Is that true, Mr. Avery?" Colton sputtered. "That, she's lying," Rylan provoked. "Funny," the journalist said, "because we have it on video." Every phone screen lit up. Someone pressed play. There he was, recorded from 3 angles, grabbing Mara, insulting Rylan, calling the triplets heirs, sneering about downgrades, threatening custody as leverage. The room went silent. Colton staggered back, face chalk white. Executives exchanged horrified glances. A board member whispered urgently into a phone. A PR director looked like she might faint. Then, from across the ballroom, someone said the words that detonated the night. "Is this the man you want leading a multi-billion-dollar company?" Colton's image collapsed in real time. And Mara watched it happen with the quiet strength of someone who had survived far worse than his rage. Behind her, Rylan gently touched her back. "You did good," he murmured. But Mara wasn't thinking about victory. She was thinking one simple truth. For the first time in years, Colton wasn't the one in control. And the fall had only just begun. The fallout from the Plaza Gala hit faster than anyone expected. By sunrise, 3 different videos of Colton's outburst had gone viral, one on a finance blog, one on TikTok, and one posted anonymously by someone inside the gala. Each clip showed him grabbing Mara's wrist, belittling her, mocking Rylan, and practically confessing to abandoning the triplets. The internet did not forgive him. By noon the next day, Mara received an unexpected call from Harper. "The board has summoned you," she said. "A formal review. They want your testimony." Mara's stomach twisted. "Me? Why?" "Because Colton is denying everything, and they no longer trust him." The review was to be held in a private conference room on the 78th floor of Avery Tower, one of the same floors Mara used to visit when she was Mrs. Avery, smiling politely at executives who never learned her name. Now she would return not as a silent ornament, but as a witness. Rylan insisted on driving her. "You sure you're ready?" he asked as they rode the elevator skyward. "No," she whispered, "but I'm going anyway." The doors opened to a room full of glass, steel, and intimidating power. The skyline stretched out behind the board members, each sitting rigidly, their faces carved with concern and calculation. Colton was already there, pale, tense, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept. When he saw Rylan walk in behind Mara, something inside him snapped. "He doesn't belong here," Colton barked, pointing at Rylan. A board member cut in sharply. "Mr. Avery, this is a formal review. You are not conducting it." Colton bit back his rage, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. Harper motioned for Mara to sit. Her hands trembled as she opened her folder of documents. Every medical bill, every unanswered message, every piece of evidence she had spent months organizing. Rylan sat behind her, steady, silently promising she wasn't alone. "We want to understand the truth," the chairwoman said gently. "We've seen the footage, but we want your full statement." Mara inhaled, and then she told them everything. The night Colton walked out, the premature labor, the unanswered calls, the years of no support, the intimidation, the contract demanding photo ops and silence, the threats at the gala. Each word landed like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through the room. The board members exchanged dark looks. One of them pinched the bridge of his nose, another typed furiously into a tablet. Colton finally snapped. "She's lying. She planned that pregnancy, Rylan stood up. "That's enough." Colton wheeled toward him. "You don't get to speak," but a board member cut him off. "Mr. Avery, sit down before you dig the hole deeper." Silence fell. Then the chairwoman turned to Mara. "One final question," she said softly. "If you had to choose who acted as the father to your children, who would it be?" Mara felt the weight of the entire room pressing against her, but she didn't look at Colton. She looked at Rylan. "The man who was there," she said softly, "every night, every hospital visit, every moment." Rylan's breath caught. Colton's face collapsed. And in that single moment, the truth became undeniable. The board saw it, Colton felt it, Mara owned it, the empire had cracked, and the final break was coming. The boardroom was silent, suspended in a tension so sharp it felt like the air itself could snap. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan glittered in the afternoon light, cold, distant, indifferent. Inside, Colton Avery sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on Mara, as if willing her to take back what she had just said. But she didn't. She held her ground. The chairwoman, "Thank you, Miss Jensen. Thank you, we appreciate your honesty." Then she turned to Colton. "Mr. Avery, do you have anything to say regarding these allegations?" Colton's mouth opened, but no words came out. Rage simmered in his eyes, boiling beneath the surface. He wasn't used to being questioned, much less cornered. For a man accustomed to commanding entire rooms with a glance, the loss of control was something he couldn't conceal. He pointed a shaking finger at Mara. "You're doing this because of him," he hissed, glaring at Rylan. "You think he's some hero? He's nobody. He's nothing." Rylan didn't move. He simply said, "The kids don't think so." The simple truth struck harder than any insult. Colton lunged to stand, but a board member's voice sliced through the air. "Sit down, Mr. Avery, now." It wasn't a request. Colton froze, humiliated, trembling, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Harper handed Mara a stack of printed emails, the ones where Colton's PR team called the Triplets a liability, suggested smearing Mara's mental health, and discussed fabricating stories to protect his image. The board took turns reading. Expression after expression shifted from concern to disappointment to disgust. One finally looked up. "Mr. Avery, this is indefensible." Colton's face flushed a deep red. "That's private correspondence. You have no right." "You involved your corporation in a personal attack," the chairwoman said sharply. "That makes it our business." Mara felt her heartbeat thrumming in her ears, a surreal mix of fear and vindication swirling inside her. She had never intended to destroy him, but he had left her no other path to survival. A board member turned to her gently. "You said earlier that you raised these children alone. Can you explain what support, if any, Mr. Avery provided?" Mara inhaled. "None." The word echoed. Rylan stepped forward then, not to argue but to hold out a folder of his own. Inside were pediatric appointment logs, receipts from formula he'd bought, emergency room records with his name listed as the Triplets' contact, and dozens of text messages where Mara begged for help while Colton ignored her. "Everything I have," Rylan said quietly, "I give freely. I never asked for credit." The board studied him with a mixture of respect and guilt. Guilt for ever believing Colton's curated image. Then the chairwoman said the words that shook the room. "Mr. Avery, is this the man who has acted as the children's father?" Colton's face twisted. "He's a fraud. I'm their biological. That's not what we asked." Her voice cut the air cleanly. "We asked who has shown up." Colton's throat tightened. His eyes darted to Mara, then to Rylan, then back to the board, like a trapped animal searching for a way out. There was none. His breath hitched. His hand gripped the table. His composure finally cracked open. For the first time in his adult life, the billionaire who believed he was untouchable looked small, fragile, beaten. "Mara," he whispered, voice breaking, "please, don't take them from me." She felt the sting of the plea, but not its sincerity, because he wasn't begging for his children. He was begging for control, for image, for ego. She stood slowly. "You already lost them," she said softly, "the day you walked away." Colton shut his eyes. And in that moment, in that single devastating moment, the man who thought he could never fall finally collapsed beneath the weight of his own choices. The boardroom felt colder when the deliberation began. Colton sat hunched forward, elbows on the polished table, fingers pressed into his temples as if trying to hold his world together by force. Mara watched him silently. There was no satisfaction in seeing him crumble, only the heavy, inevitable truth catching up to him. The board members stepped out for a private vote, leaving a silence so deep Mara could hear her own heartbeat. Rylan sat beside her, his hand resting near hers on the table, not touching but close enough to anchor her. Colton finally spoke. "You ruined me," he whispered, voice raw. Mara didn't look at him. "You ruined yourself." Minutes felt like hours until the doors opened and the board filed back in, expressions grim, resolute, professional in a way that left no space for mercy. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Mr. Avery, the board has reached a decision." Colton straightened, gripping the edge of his seat. Effective immediately. You are suspended as CEO pending full investigation. Your voting power is frozen. Your access to company funds is restricted. A third-party ethics auditor will review all internal communications tied to your misconduct. Colton's face collapsed in disbelief. You can't do this. I built this company. The chairwoman didn't blink. And now you're the greatest threat to it. He surged to his feet, but two security officers stepped forward, not touching him, just standing close enough to remind him he had no authority left. Mara looked away. She didn't want to see his humiliation, but she couldn't unhear the sound he made, half snarl, half wounded animal. You think this is over? He spat at her. Mara met his eyes calmly. No, but this is the beginning. Harper rose from her chair, stacking documents. Next is custody and financial restitution, she said briskly. Miss Jensen will file for full legal custody and retroactive child support for the period of abandonment. Colton turned pale. Retroactive meant massive. Years of unpaid medical bills, childcare costs, and penalties. She's trying to bankrupt me. Harper didn't flinch. You abandoned 3 premature infants, Mr. Avery. The law assigns value to the damage you caused. One board member adjusted his glasses. We will also be issuing a public statement condemning your actions. The shareholders deserve transparency. Colton staggered back as if struck. His empire, his legacy, was disintegrating faster than he could breathe. Then came the final blow. The chairwoman looked at Mara with unexpected gentleness. Miss Jensen, considering the evidence, we formally support your custody petition. If you require a character witness, the board will provide one. Colton's knees buckled. Please, Mara, please. But she didn't move toward him. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't vindictive. She simply no longer needed to carry the weight of his choices. Security escorted him out as he shouted, I'll fight this! I'll fight all of you! The doors slammed, the echoes faded. Rylan exhaled slowly. You did it, he whispered. Mara felt tears sting her eyes, not of sorrow but release. No, she said softly, we did. Because this wasn't victory built on vengeance. It was justice, finally delivered to a man who believed the world owed him forgiveness he never earned. The days after the board's decision felt unreal, as if Mara were walking through a world made of smoke and sunlight. For years she had lived inside fear. Fear of bills, fear of court papers, fear of Colton's shadow stretching across her life like a storm cloud. But now, for the first time, the fear began to thin. Rylan showed up the morning after the hearing with a key in his hand. I want to show you something, he said, voice hesitant, almost shy. He drove her and the triplets across the Brooklyn Bridge, the skyline rising behind them like a reminder of what they had survived. Eventually, he parked in front of a narrow brownstone tucked between 2 tall trees. The building was worn but charming, brick glowing soft red, windows trimmed in white. Rylan stepped out and opened the back door to unbuckle Noah. I've been renovating it, he explained. For months. Figured someone would need it someday. Mara blinked. Someone? He glanced at her, then at the babies. Yeah, someone. He led them inside. Warm light pooled across the hardwood floors. The walls were freshly painted a soft cream. 3 tiny rooms upstairs held freshly built cribs, still unboxed. The kitchen smelled faintly of cedar and new beginnings. On the counter sat a small vase holding 3 daisies. A lump rose in Mara's throat. You did all this for us? For you, he corrected gently, and for them. But only if you want it. No pressure, no expectations. She walked through the space slowly, touching the smooth banister, the sunlit windows, the sturdy dining table he had sanded by hand. It didn't feel like a house. It felt like safety. Something she hadn't felt since her mother died. In the living room, Rylan knelt and let the triplets crawl around him. They laughed, full, happy sounds that filled the air like music. Noah tugged at Rylan's sleeve. Lily reached for his watch. Finn leaned against him with quiet trust. They love you, Mara whispered. Rylan looked up. I love them. Something inside her cracked open. Something tender, something terrified, something hopeful. They spent the afternoon assembling cribs, stacking diapers, and arranging a play area. Mara caught Rylan lifting Finn and spinning him gently, both laughing. She caught herself smiling too, really smiling. As evening fell, they sat on the stoop outside the brownstone. The babies slept in their carriers beside them. Streetlights flickered on. A warm breeze drifted down the block. This feels unreal, Mara said softly. It's real, Rylan replied. And it's yours, if you want it. Mara stared at him. the man who had walked into her life quietly and rebuilt every shattered piece with patience and care. "Why did you stay?" she asked. He took a breath, eyes soft. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and because I couldn't watch you fight alone." Their shoulders brushed, a touch small but electric. For the first time in years, Mara felt the future settle gently in her hands. Not something to fear, but something she could shape. This home, this moment, this man. They were the first true promise of a life she never thought she'd deserve. Spring settled softly over Brooklyn, brushing the brownstone-lined streets with sunlight and new leaves. For the first time in years, Mara felt each morning begin not with dread, but with quiet gratitude. The triplets woke to warm breakfasts, laughter echoed through the halls, and Rylan moved through the home like he'd always belonged there. The wounds of her past hadn't vanished, but they no longer defined her. Colton had vanished from her day-to-day life, swallowed by lawsuits, ethics investigations, and a tidal wave of public outrage. Harper kept her updated. His assets were frozen, his board seat revoked, and prosecutors were reviewing financial misconduct tied to the smear campaign against her. Justice worked slowly, but it was working. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Mara took the triplets to Prospect Park with Rylan. The children toddled across the grass, chasing bubbles Rylan blew into the breeze. Finn burst into giggles. Lily twirled. Noah clapped and followed the glimmering orbs like they were magic. Mara watched them with her hand pressed to her chest. "They're happy," she whispered. "They're safe," Rylan corrected gently. When the sun dipped low, they walked home. Rylan carried Lily, Noah held Mara's hand, and Finn dozed against Rylan's shoulder. It felt like a family. It was a family, even if no one had said it out loud. Inside the brownstone, Mara tucked the babies into their cribs. When she turned around, she found Rylan standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes soft as candlelight. "I want to talk to you," he said quietly. Her heart skipped. "About what?" "About us." He stepped closer, stopping just inches away. "Mara, when I first met you, I saw someone fighting alone. You shouldn't have had to, and I didn't stay because I pitied you. I stayed because you're strong and kind and brave, and because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Her breath trembled. She hadn't expected those words, not from him, not after everything. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said softly, "but I need you to know how I feel." She swallowed, emotion thickening her voice. "Rylan, you helped rebuild my life. I don't know how to even begin." He gently took her hand. "Begin with this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, hand-carved, imperfect, beautiful. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just sincerity shaped into silver. "I'm not Colton," he whispered. "I can't give you penthouses or private jets, but I can promise you that you'll never face another storm alone, and that your kids will never wonder who loves them." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Rylan, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder, whispering the yes that had lived in her heart long before he ever asked. The children stirred softly behind them, as if sensing the shift. Rylan kissed her forehead, holding her as gently as the first night he fixed her fuse box. Outside, Brooklyn glowed under the streetlights, ordinary, imperfect, real. Mara Jensen finally had everything she once thought she'd lost. A home, a family, a man who stayed, and a future grounded not in fear, but in love earned through fire. Justice had come full circle, and so had she. So that's where the story closes for now. And if you're still here listening until this very moment, then something in this journey must have touched your heart in a way you maybe didn't expect. So let's breathe together for a second and look at this story from a gentler angle. What happened to Mara isn't just fiction. It's a reminder of something Marcus Aurelius once wrote. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Real strength lies in how you respond. Because life will break you. People will disappoint you. But healing begins the moment you choose not to let cruelty define your future. Mara found love again, not because she was lucky, but because she kept going. She fought for her children, she stood up to injustice, and she allowed herself to believe that kindness could return after loss. That is something every one of us can carry into our own lives. So if you're walking through something heavy right now, remember, storms don't last and you are allowed to rebuild. If this story meant something to you, even just a little, drop a like, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. We're in this together, friend.